The other form of drama that was introduced by the Americans were Broadway theater or stage musicals. It was introduced in the 1930s through the westernized education that was provided in most private schools for privileged children. Now, Shakespearean tragedies and comedies, as well as Western classics, were performed in the original English or English adaptation. During the Japanese occupation, movie actors and actresses could not appear in films anymore, and the Japanese confiscated all film equipments because it can be used as an anti-propaganda of the Filipinos against the Japanese occupants. The vaudeville evolved to become stage shows or variety shows with a short melodrama at the end to accommodate the actors and actresses who moved their craft. Now, the Manila Grand Opera House and the Savoy Theater were two of the most famous theaters and opera houses that was used during the Japanese occupation. Now, after the war, the Philippine theater has evolved to become an amalgamation of the various influences such that of the zarzuela, vaudeville, comedia, and Western classics. Now, by the 1950s, theater has moved out of classrooms and the concept of paying for a ticket to see a theatrical performance emerged. Now, this legitimate theater was held in closed theaters. These became events in themselves, not just mere parts of a celebration or a religious ritual. Now, after the war, 1950s is said to be the golden age of Philippine cinema. All of the veteran actors that we have, Gloria Romero, the late Eddie Garcia, Eddie Gutierrez, Fernando Poe Jr., the king of Philippine cinema, Susan Roses, the queen of Philippine cinema, we have Nida Blanca, Amalia Fuentes, so those veteran actors started in the 1950s as teen idols as part of a love team. Even before we had Kathniel, Jadine, we had Liz Ken, we already have these veteran actors as former parts of a love team. So as you can see, on the bottom left corner, you have the young Gloria Romero, the beautiful Gloria Romero, as the first Filipina model for Coca-Cola. And on the right, you have the young and dashing Eddie Gutierrez, one of the most famous teen idols during the 1950s. Now, what are the elements of a good drama? A good drama must have, number one, a good set of characters. Your characters must have character. It would be boring if all of the characters are protagonists. If all are antagonists, it would be a mess. And if all are just supporting actors, your characters must be a good mix of both protagonists, antagonists, and supporting actors because it would create a good number two, conflict in your film. Of course, your antagonist creates the conflict for the story. And if there is no conflict, there is no spice in your storyline. And if you have a good set of characters and you have a good conflict, you can create the third important element, which is a good story or plot for your play or your film. Now let us continue our discussion with the dramatic structure or Freytag's pyramid. The Freytag's pyramid was named after Gustav Freytag. The Freytag was born in July 13, 1816 in Klugsburg in Silesia, part of modern-day Germany. He was a German novelist and playwright. Now, in Freytag's pyramid, the dramatic storyline should be divided into 5 parts. The storyline is considered good if it can be dissected into 5 parts. Now, what are these 5 parts? Let us start with the first one, the exposition. The exposition is considered as the start of the story. It is the established situation before the story begins. So, in exposition, you should be able to introduce the background of the characters. You should introduce the characters, their background, and you should be able to introduce the setting of the story. So the second part is the rising action. So your rising action is the series of complications, conflicts, and layers of mystery that will build towards the climax. So the third part, the Freytag's pyramid, is the climax. The climax is said to be the turning point and the point of highest emotional intensity, especially for the audience. So the fourth part, you have the falling action. It is the action following the climax wherein the jigsaw puzzles fall into place. It is the part wherein the mystery or the conflict which appeared in the rising action would be solved. And the last part, you have the resolution. The resolution or the denouement. Your resolution happens wherein any disruptions caused by the rising action are now returned to a state of normalcy. So, justice has been served. If the protagonist was harmed by the antagonist, it should go back to the sense of normalcy back in the part of the exposition. So if you already see that scene in the film or in the play, then that is already the part of the resolution. So those are the 5 different parts of the Freytag's pyramid. Now, for us to understand the Freytag's pyramid, let us apply it to a beloved fairy tale. We have Cinderella. Okay, so using this fairy tale, let us find out and let us dissect the 5 different parts. So let us start with number 1. We have exposition. So in this fairy tale, and in any fairy tale, the exposition usually starts with the phrase, once upon a time. So from Cinderella's childhood, going to her mother's death, to the entrance of her stepmother and step-siblings, and her life during the entrance of her stepmother and stepsisters. So from this part, that is your exposition of the fairy tale. So next, what is the rising action of the fairy tale? From the death of her father down to the harsh treatment she received from her stepmother and her stepsisters. Now, she asked if she could attend the ball, but she was mocked by her stepmother because she has nothing to wear but rags. So that is the rise of the conflict in the story, in the fairy tale. So that is your rising action. So the third part, the climax, the point of the highest emotional intensity, it started when her fairy godmother appeared. And then she magically transformed Cinderella's rags into a ball gown, the mice into horses and coachmen, and then the squash as a carriage, up until her time at the ball, and up until the time wherein the clocks strike 12 in the midnight, and she ran off from the Prince Charming, living her glass sleeper. So those are the scenes comprising the climax of the fairy tale.